Everyone, let's give it up for our two presenters to wrap up the evening.
Hello, everyone. My name is Eric. This is Brandon. I'll just do the introducing this right. Yeah. Welcome to Scalable Security, how to win friends and not burn out everyone. So as I said, I'm Eric. This is Brandon. We work in the privacy, safety, and security org at Google. So that's a really big org. That doesn't really mean any much. I work on like internal firewall management, and you do fun stuff with like hardware security and device attestation. Fun stuff. But yeah, like I think one thing that we feel and that maybe hopefully some of you do is that like we're not really on the red team or the blue team or the purple team or the orange team or whatever color you've picked today. We're on that team that kind of just gets given security problems and then is like, hi, could you please go fix that? And then we're really lucky because we work at a really big organization. So they're like, can you go fix this for hundreds of thousands of people? And then can you do this again? Oh, and again, and again, and again. And over the last 5 years, you're almost at 7, which is insane. We've done this a bunch. We've had some mixed success, but that's okay. And we've only burnt out a few times and are always in kind of a constant state of either burnt out or not burnt out, but that's okay. It's right there. Okay. Yeah, anyway, so this talk is going to be about some lessons we've learned burning out and trying to deploy controls. And we're going to be all confident and be like, yeah, this is how you don't do this. So yeah, the agenda today is first we're going to kind of talk about what we mean by scale. I recognize that's a buzzword, but hopefully that's why you're all here, it's because of buzzwords. And then we'll talk through some general themes we think that are important when you're doing this kind of grunt work of like, take a control, roll it out, and try to not piss off as many people as possible. So we're going to talk about measurement and good controls and bad controls and being proactive and not reactive and communication. And all this is going to get repeated, so it's not worth, going again. Anyway, Brandon, what do we actually mean by security at scale?
Google is a big company. We have hundreds of thousands of employees, billions of users, dozens of chat apps, and the company has grown incredibly quickly. In software engineering at Google, we don't think about, can you scale your product by 2x or 3x? We think, can you scale it 10x or 100x? And that's what we mean by scale in this talk. This presentation is about how scale applies specifically to security. Could your team handle 10x more work? If you review every feature before it launches or every SaaS app before it's deployed to your company, could you handle 10x more of those? If you have to manually process every vulnerability on one platform, could you handle 4 more of them? If users reach out to you every time you break them and they can't do their work, could you handle having 10x more employees? We once ran a remediation where we're getting hundreds of tickets a day with users requesting exceptions. And that was a good remediation. These problems aren't unique to security. Every team at Google has these problems. This slide deck had to be reviewed by a PR team that has to review every slide deck ever presented. If your workload increases with the number of users you have, the number of devices in your organization, the number of vulnerabilities that are discovered, you won't be able to keep up without burning out. You cannot work harder to keep up with scale. Your team cannot hire fast enough to keep up with scale. If you try to be a hero, you will burn out. Your team cannot adapt to scale by itself. It turns out talking to people is actually really important. And as an organization scales, your job quickly becomes convincing other people to do security, not actually doing security yourself. Everything in this presentation is going to seem super obvious, and we understand that. But actually doing these things consistently and well is much harder than it seems. So we're going to talk about measurements, controls, being proactive versus reactive, and strategies for communicating with your users.
And again, to just reiterate the talking about simple things rather than complicated things. I don't know what my idea of what a security engineer did before I got this job, but afterwards it's definitely doing Excel spreadsheets and writing SQL queries. Measurement actually turns out to be a big part of basically all we do, is like figuring out how bad this is going to be or how much we're going to, mess up people's days. So it's, while again, it seems super simple, the amount of times we've had people just come to us and not be able to answer these questions begs repeating. And 1 second, because I can't see better. All right, so before you begin, on your security journey, you should be able to answer very basic questions. Like, what is the size of your problem? If you have some app that is malicious and being installed on your devices, do you know how many devices it's installed on? Is it 2? Is it 500? If you're looking to turn down a feature because it's insecure, how many people use it in the last 90 days? I've been in a million meetings where people are talking past each other, where one query would have just solved that problem immediately. And then, of course, once you have that data, it's never enough to just get the initial value. You have to go deeper. So, is 300 a big number in your organization? For us, it might not be, or it might, right? And then finally, are you impacting a single team or a role, right? When we're doing analysis, we're never just thinking what is the number, right? It's, is this number all from one team? Is it from, a particular product that somebody's working on? Answering these questions will let you know, can you just go talk to that one team and solve the problem? Or is this something where you're going to have to involve lots and lots of people? And then finally, you're just going to hit limits at some point. I forget when this was, but we were working with somebody who was giving a presentation to us and said, look, I know that this impacts somewhere between 10,000 people at the company and 200,000. And I know that that's a big range, but at least it's a range and at least it's somewhere you can go. And then finally, you're just not going to have data at some point, and that's okay. We had plenty of scenarios where you're giving a thing to a VP and you're like, hi, I need a little bit more time to get better data to figure out how many people we're going to break. And the VP is like, look, just break them. We'll figure it out later. And that's also happens. And then there's a shocking amount of actual engineering work that goes into getting this data. I have written controls that have never been deployed anywhere in any enforcing mode, but we write them in an audit mode to see, if we deployed this and tried to turn up the pain, how many people would actually come getting mad at us. And that is really informative because it puts you in the firing line without actually putting you in the firing line. And then we do not roll out controls all at once, right? You take 1% of the company, you roll it out, 2%, 10%, so on and so forth. And this is great because it gives you a little period where the size is actually manageable, where you can go talk to every person that you might be impacting. And then a little trick we've learned is if you just change the defaults, you'd be surprised. So if you're a company and you're hiring a lot, or if you're rotating hardware, if you just flip the default for a particular control and just don't tell anyone, or tell people, but whatever. If you wait a couple of years, you might get 80% compliance. So don't do the hard things before you do the easy things, definitely. And speaking of good controls, or Brandon, more importantly.
Bad controls. This is a bad control. Telling users not to click on suspicious links doesn't work. But what is a good control? It may seem obvious, but having a structured way to evaluate what is actually a good control in your organization will help you inadvertently deploy bad controls. So what makes a good control? You can not rely on your users to do the right thing. Telling users don't click on suspicious links doesn't work. Your users don't know what suspicious links are. Telling users, having a security policy that tells users not to use unapproved VPNs doesn't work. Your users don't know what the definition of an unapproved VPN is. And to that point, if your users can install unapproved VPNs in the first place, what are you even doing? If you actually care about something, enforce on it. Don't shift the blame or the burden to the users. If deploying a new control requires talking to everyone it impacts, you won't be able to keep up. Spend the time upfront to develop documentation and tools to help users migrate themselves. And security controls inevitably increase over time. In site reliability engineering, they have a concept of an error budget where they predetermine how much pain they're willing to inflict on users before they take action. Consider having a control budget. How much friction are you willing to cause to your users before you have to change something? For example, if your team is going to deploy yet another agent onto the platforms, how does this impact performance? And is there another agent you can get rid of instead? Be wary of controls that have to be updated every time software changes. Examples of this are kernel extensions, SE Linux policies, application allow lists. The ecosystem moves faster than you can update these policies. And when you introduce new controls, eventually your team will have more controls it can maintain. So be willing to turn down controls. Some of them probably don't really matter that much. Consider using controls that are integrated into the platforms you're securing instead of buying controls from vendors or building tools yourself. And if you can't do either of those things, find another team that's in a better position to maintain these controls, like your IT team.
And just for the last slide, like I think we've ripped out more controls from Google than we've ever written. So just to give you a sense of like the scale of that problem for us, at least. Inside of Google, we have this motto that goes around. It's from like OG, Aurora era Google, but it's secure by default, insecure by exception. And I actually really like this because it packs up really quite a lot into just 6 words. So we're going to go through it. And I think the first part, right, secure by default. If you're going to do something at a company, like let's say you're going to deploy something to production or you're going to share some information with a user or a customer. If you search the wiki and you get an answer that is the top answer and says, do it this way, that had better be secure. And if you're not working on securing those well-lit paths, you're doing it wrong, right? Those should always be the safest way to do something. The easiest way should be the safest way. But inevitably, your controls will just break at some point, or to the point where a user is going to need to do something to do their job where the control blocks them. And you still need to do your job, right? And this is where we get into this idea of exceptions. So exceptions at Google are actual things that are always built into every control we have. So the idea being that if we implement a control, we always have a mechanism to turn it off for a particular set of use cases. These are not just like an email thread from a security engineer that you then quote later on. These are going to be tracked in group management systems somewhere. We have an idea of when they expire. We also kind of know what the justification for that exception was. So when we implement a control, we might have a bug, and a lot of people will need to get exempted. We will track that, so when we fix the bug, we can actually go back to those people and fix it up. And again, like when we're rolling out controls, we try to hand out exceptions like candy, right? Like if you are implementing control and you know somebody will be blocked by it, it's an expectation that you're just going to give it to them ahead of time and then clean it up later. So always, again, trying to think user first about these kind of things. But there are some anti-patterns with this. This is a slide from France, actually. And these little, I don't think the things actually have a name, but these little metal things on the concrete are basically to stop people from either sleeping on it or sitting on it. If you've lived in San Francisco even 5 seconds, you've probably seen stuff like this around. This has a general term called hostile architecture. Hostile architecture is architecture that serves no purpose other than to discourage something. So it's not for value, it's just, again, the value comes from preventing someone from doing something. I've seen a lot of teams, so exceptions in general feel bad because you're turning off a control. It feels like a security risk, and it is, but I've seen a lot of teams effectively give users grief when they come asking for a security exception to do their job. And it's very important just for mentally when you're thinking about this, exceptions are a good thing. They let you roll out a control in a way that you could roll it out without worrying about every detail. And when a user is asking you, that should not be the time when you're having a security conversation. And again, this does not mean that you should give everyone an exception. It should be clear when you don't, but definitely don't treat this as an opportunity to, cause your users pain. Exceptions are a good thing. People who need exceptions should get them. Proactive, not reactive.
Some security incidents are genuinely oh shit moments. This is one of them. We both spent a week over Christmas 2021 responding to Log4j, and that's okay. Attempting to plan for these type of incidents isn't worth your time. However, every day there's another 9.2 CVSS vulnerability, there's another breach in one of your vendors, or there's another super scary tweet that your leadership saw. These are not oh shit moments, they're your job, and attempting to treat them as such will cause you to burn out. Be proactive. A threat model tells you what risks really matter, but more importantly, it tells you what risks don't matter. When your VP asks about that scary tweet, use telemetry to put the risk in context so you can get back to proactively defending your organization instead of dealing with this. Establish remediation SLOs before vulnerabilities happen. For everything that's not Log4j, don't panic. Stick to your SLOs. Pushing your team or partner teams to patch faster will lead to burnout. There are security teams, like incident response teams, that are built to be constantly handling emergencies. If you aren't on such a team, constantly jumping from emergency to emergency will burn you out. If a problem isn't worth involving your incident response team, it's not worth working nights or weekends. Go home. Eric?
And then finally, we're going to talk about communication. So I'm really lucky to work somewhere where we hire a bunch of smart people. It's actually kind of like a gift and a curse, but that's a different talk. I've been in rooms where I have the security title, and I am the least qualified person to talk about security for a particular problem, right? And that's okay. But I think what this has really taught us is that these teams don't put up with your BS of like, this is important because security, which while that obviously sounds like a straw man, that is the essential argument for a lot of the things that I hear sometimes from security teams. Why is this important? Because security. We want to get you past because security. One of my biggest pet peeves is when anyone ever says the word privilege of, principle of least privilege or mandatory access control versus discretionary access control. If you ever say that, I'm muting the thread and I'm not listening to you. And then be transparent. Why is more important than how? Expressing what you're trying to do or what you're trying to protect is more important than how you are trying to do it. Again, going back to those rooms, I've said like, I want to do this control because I'm scared about this data. And some senior SRE shows up and says, oh, I can get to that data 5 different ways. That's actually a good conversation, right? Because you've expressed to them what you're trying to do rather than how to do it. And then be consistent. It's really hard on these teams because you're going to have to hire junior engineers occasionally, and they're going to have to sit in those meetings too. And if they don't have a reason other than because security, it's hard for them to have the same sort of sense of consistency with those teams and get the same outcome. You cannot be the person triaging every single conversation, or you're going to have to go on vacation sometime. And then in a more meta level, like if you can't explain why something is important, it might not be. So this is actually a really good exercise for yourself to figure out like, why is this important to us at all? And then finally, be rigorous. So our friend Guillaume came over from Mozilla to our team and introduced this thing called the rapid risk assessment. This is like a 2-page template that says like, here's how you write up a security assessment. And the craziest thing about it is it just says like, what is the data you're concerned about? What are some examples of how an attacker might get around this control and get access to that data? What are the mitigations and what is like things we should get to eventually and what is over my dead body? And that seems like not a lot, but it is dramatically different just to have some structure, particularly for any of your users or any of your partner teams. Like that drives conversations so much better. So use a framework if you can.
We found that security is as much about workplace culture as it is actually defending the organization. Users in different types of organizations have radically different expectations. As an extreme example, the NSA gets away with sticking their users in a windowless box with no cell phone. Google cannot get away with putting our users in a windowless box. Getting the balance of security and culture can be sometimes incredibly difficult. And getting it wrong can lead to backlashes that destroy your company culture and burn out your team. And that leads me to my next point. You can inadvertently have huge impact on your company culture just by deploying security controls. As an example, if you start requiring your users to use MDM, this fundamentally, on their personal device, this fundamentally changes their relationship with the company. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but be honest with yourself when you're rolling out security controls that have cultural contexts in your organization.
And yeah, I think that's basically the rest of the talk. And I think that hopefully what this talk has at least described is like, I feel a lot of pressure a lot of the times with a lot of alarm bells going off of, things that seem critical or important. And for me, that always, drains me and burns me out. And it is rough sometimes to be having security conversations because all conversations kind of feel like that. Scale is unforgiving, right? You can keep having those conversations, but that doesn't mean that you're actually going to be solving the core security problems. And you can feel like you're doing a lot and actually not doing anything. And then again, this is very easy for us to sit up here and, give this talk and say, this is how you all should be doing. But just know that everything is on this slide because at some point we have failed utterly at that. So do not think that this is how you should run your security teams and, you must do all of this, but more that we hope that if you go back to your company and, are doing something that sounds like something we've talked about in this slide, that this gives you some amount of tooling or capabilities to help you approach it in a healthy way without just burning everyone out. So with that, thanks.
Right.
There will be questions. Is there? I guess.
Folks, sorry. From our leadership, we're going to be pushing a cleanup and kind of sweep through the theater. So QA, again, will be pushed out to the freestyle cipher in the hallway outside of the theaters. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.